Has mass low-skilled migration depreciated the value of work and indeed the productivity of countries like the United Kingdom and Canada? Well, that was the claim of US Vice President JD Vance speaking this week. My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Originals. The United States Vice President JD Vance has not been timid about talking about other countries, whether it's at the Munich Security Conference, talking about the really responsibility of European countries to defend their values, but also, of course, with controversial comments about which countries might be defending Ukraine. Some random country were his words. Well, now for a third time, the US Vice President has spoken about other countries while in post, and these are comments that are being cheered by some quarters in the United Kingdom and disavowed by others. Well, he was pointing to two countries that have had mass migration over the course of the last few years. Both the United Kingdom and Canada have increased their population by huge degrees, millions more people coming into these countries, and by the same measure, looking at GDP per capita, both of these countries, the United Kingdom and Canada, have been stagnating. Is this something that is a correlation or perhaps a causation? Well, the contention of the US Vice President is that the more low-skilled migration a country accepts or indeed invites, the less incentive there is for various businesses to invest in productivity, to invest in that sort of machinery, that sort of infrastructure that will allow for more to be done with less. The more you can rely on low-skilled, cheap labour, the less you will have to invest in the labour-saving technology that could increase productivity. Is part of our productivity problem here in the United Kingdom, frankly, that we have given too many companies the easy way out? Could we be a much more technologically advanced country, a much more productive country, if we had a smaller pool of low-skilled labour? That is the view of the United States Vice President, and it is being used as a warning, really, for people in the United States to look at countries like the United Kingdom, look at countries like Canada, and look at their growth rates per capita compared to a country like the United States. Look at their technology adoption per capita compared to the United States. Look at their productivity. This is a warning from the United States in many ways, and people in the United Kingdom feel that that is not a pretty place to be in. You don't want to be pointed out by politicians in other countries as a line of what not to do. And yet, that's the position that both the United Kingdom and Canada face. There are those, on the other hand, who say that the productivity problems that countries like the United Kingdom face are less to do with migration and more to do with structural elements, how hard it is to get things built in this country. For example, we know that we're building amongst the most expensive railways. We know how hard it is to get new roads built, new homes built. We know that we have all sorts of arm's length, unaccountable quangos that demand more judicial reviews and indeed more environmental costs on anything that tries to be built. Is this also part of the productivity problem, or can two things be true at once? Big questions to ask, and indeed a conversation has been opened there by the Vice President, looking at some of the problems that clearly the United Kingdom faces. Clearly productivity has been stagnating. Some people blame migration, some people blame the regulations around the cost of building things, the judicial reviews, the environmental activism that keeps our energy expensive. This, of course, another issue. It's perhaps no coincidence that in 2008 the Climate Change Act was passed, and also since 2008 we've had that productivity slump. Of course, another element of this is the financial crisis. In 2008 we saw the biggest global financial crisis in around a century. That clearly had a knock-on effect, but why did it affect Britain more than some other countries? Well, There's the contention that, of course, low-skilled migration has allowed for zombie companies to continue for longer than they otherwise would, a sort of artificial pumping up of low wages in this economy. Could a combination of low interest rates, cheap and easy money, alongside cheap and easy labour, mean that actually we didn't have the proper shock that the economy might have needed? Sometimes in a recession, what you need is for bad businesses to go under so that good and strong businesses can really build up. There's something called Austrian business cycle theory that suggests that low interest rates lead to bad firms limping on longer than they should, without a real injection of hard graft in the economy. I suppose a parallel argument could be taken with a wide pool of access to low-skilled or even subsidised labour, as we do see in our labour market. Could this be preventing some of the hard-nosed decisions that our businesses have needed to take? Perhaps it has been too hard for businesses to fail. Although, on the other hand, the availability of credit, according to some analysis, has been much harder in the United Kingdom than the United States. Why could this be? Well, one of the consequences of the global financial crisis wasn't just that interest rates were cut, it's also that huge financial regulation was placed on the biggest banks. Now, in the United States, there is a variety of financial institution infrastructure. There are banks that are small, medium, and large. Lots of places for businesses to go and get credit if they so wish. In the United Kingdom, almost uniquely, we rely on a small number of very large financial institutions. Now, it's only the very largest financial institutions that have been whacked with the heaviest degree of regulation in the wake of the financial crisis. So could it be that actually, in this country, in the United Kingdom, we've regulated our financial sector more than other countries, not because we've got more regulation, but because more of our financial institutions are subject to the regulation that the whole world has adopted? That would mean that there's less risk-taking from the investors sitting in London than the investors sitting right across the United States. There are, of course, as many different explanations for our productivity problem as there are economists. There's a famous joke: you get 3 or 4 economists in a room, you ask them to solve a question, you'll get 6 or 7, 8 or 9, 10 or 11 different answers, because economists can't even agree with themselves, let alone each other. And yet, this conversation started by J.D. Vance. It's an important conversation to have. Very often we talk about economic migration as if it's an unalloyed economic good. But when you have the sort of social safety net that a country like the United Kingdom has, when in effect so much labour is subsidised through the tax system, when people earning below a certain amount are actually not net contributors to the UK economy over the course of their lifetime, when people bring over dependents or indeed have children in the school system as well, at what point does this become an economic cost rather than an economic opportunity to the country? These are conversations that have been started, that have been amplified by the words of the Vice President of the United States. There will be those that say the Vice President should stick to his own country. But of course, if we listen to the words of J.D. Vance, what he was saying was pointing to other countries as an example. And shouldn't politicians be able to look at how various policies have worked around the world to try to learn from those policies, to try and learn from the outcome of what politicians in other countries, in other societies, have chosen to do? Clearly, there is going to be a lot more conversation about what has been instigated by the US Vice President this week. Perhaps a deeper look needs to be taken about the policy of countries like the United Kingdom and like Canada that have had such an unusually high level of migration over the course of the last few years. And curiously to some, such a high level of migration that coincides, that it correlates to some minds, that causes such a stagnation in living standards, such a dip in GDP per capita, and indeed such a productivity puzzle. Well, what do you make of it? Do get involved in the comments below, because I'm sure you'll have many different views over this serious issue. And indeed, was the Vice President right to comment on what has been going on in the United Kingdom and in Canada? Or, after all, was he just doing it in the context of his own country? Well, do keep that conversation going on, do enter that discussion, and remember to stay subscribed to the GB News YouTube channel for more exciting and original content.